Hi, everyone. Welcome to another workshop from the Writing Support Center. My name is Giselle, and today's workshop is titled Conducting Research, How to Find and Evaluate Sources. Now, before we start, I do want to give you some recommendations so that you can get the most out of this workshop. The first is I'd like you to download the directed learning activity worksheet. The worksheet should be wherever you access this workshop. On that page, you should find both a PDF and Word version. You do not need to download both, just please download the one format that works best for you. You'll also notice at the bottom of the worksheet it says you require a tutor signature. Now, because you are completing this workshop, you do not need a tutor signature. Doing the workshop with me, the instructor, allows you to forego that step. So please, you don't need to get that signed. Typically, if you were to complete a DLA in the Writing Center, you would go over it with a tutor to ensure all your answers are correct. Uh, Another thing I'd suggest is to take your time. Since this is a recorded workshop, you can pause and rewind as you need to. So if there are any points where you feel it is going too fast, just go ahead and pause so that you can take a moment to digest the information that you're getting. A few goals for this workshop. The first is you're going to be able to create a research question. Now, that means this workshop is best suited for those of you who are working on a paper that requires research. If you're working on a paper that doesn't require secondary sources, then this workshop might not be super beneficial, but it's definitely helpful if you are currently working on a paper. The second thing we will do is you're going to find articles using EBSCOhost and the PCC library. And finally, you're going to evaluate a source and determine if a source is credible and or reliable. Now, the first part of this workshop is going to focus on creating a research question. A research question is a question used to help guide your research and paper. They help you stay focused when finding sources and can help in creating a thesis statement. A research question should be clear. It should provide enough specifics so that your audience can easily understand the reason as to why you're writing this paper without a need of additional explanation. It should also be focused. So it should be narrow enough that it can be answered thoroughly in the space the writing task allows. So if you're writing a 12-page research paper, your question should be narrow enough but broad enough where you can fill 12 pages of information. Now, if it's a shorter paper, you might need that question to be a bit more focused. So it's important to consider how long your assignment is to narrow down how focused you need your question to be. The third thing is you'd like it to be concise. That means it's expressed in the fewest words possible. I think sometimes students think more words brings more meaning to a sentence, but that's not quite the case. You always want to go for clarity, and clear writing is usually concise writing. You also want to go for complexity. So it should not be answerable with a simple yes or no. Rather, it requires analysis and connection between ideas and sources. So your reader should be able to see the different connections between the sources you're using or between the sources and the main text you're using, but there should be some sort of interaction between these things in your paper. Lastly, it should be arguable. Its potential answers are open to debate rather than accepted facts. So it should be something I can't find out from a simple Google search. It should be a research question that asks for uh, um, a debatable topic, right? So you should be asking something that someone might be able to argue against. Again, it should be arguable. You may need to gather some background information before being able to create your research question. Ask yourself, what do you already know? And what do you want to know? Asking yourself these questions will help you narrow down what you'd like your research question to be about. So here are a few examples of research questions. The first one is you'd like to make sure your research question is clear. So here's one that is in progress. It reads, how should social networking address the harm they cause? Now, this question doesn't specify which social networking sites they're talking about. So it's very broad and unclear in that sense. I also don't know how they're defining harm. Um, it doesn't tell me what kind of harm is it causing. Is it a physical harm? Is it an emotional, mental harm? What kind of harm is it? It also assumes that these social networking sites are causing harm without explaining how it causes harm. So it's overall unclear, but it can be revised, and the right side shows a revised version, which reads, what action should social networking sites like MySpace and Facebook take to protect users' personal information and privacy? Now, this question is a lot clearer because it gives me specific sites such as MySpace and Facebook. It also tells me the type of harm, which is an invasion of privacy, right? Um, and it also specifies who might be experiencing that harm. And in this case, it's the users, right? So it's much more specific. I understand more about what they're asking, and there's less ambiguity. Now, this is an example of an unfocused and a focused research question. So the first version reads, what is the effect on the environment from global warming? Now, this question is too broad, and that can be overwhelming because there's a multitude of ways that you can answer this question. The revised version reads, how is glacial melting affecting penguins in Antarctica? This version works because it narrows down a specific aspect of global warming, which is glacial melting. It also narrows down a specific location, which is Antarctica, and it also points to a specific animal, in this case, penguins. So the writer's also taking, or the writer needs to take a stance once they answer this question. So it's much more focused. It gives the writer um, more specificity when tackling their research question. And they're going to be able to find a lot more specific research articles with this more focused research question version. Now, this is a third example, and it's an example of simplicity versus complexity. So the simple version reads, how are doctors addressing diabetes in the US? Now, this question can be answered quickly by looking on Google. You can just Google this question, and I'm sure you'll find an answer. It's too factual. And it doesn't provide much room for analysis. So, this wouldn't be an adequate research question. Now, on the right side, the revised version reads, what main environmental, behavioral, and genetic factors predict whether Americans will develop diabetes? And how can they be used to aid the medical community to prevent the disease? This version is written in two different parts. It's more thought provoking, it's more specific, and it requires a significant amount of investigation and evaluation from the writer. So this can't be answered with a quick Google search. The person who wrote this question will have to do a lot more research, but the research will be much more focused, which will help them answer this complex question. So the first activity on your worksheet is to create a research question. So using a prompt from one of your classes and the provided criteria, this criteria that we talked about earlier, clear, focused, concise, complex, and arguable. Using that criteria, create at least one research question you can use to help you find your sources. Sorry about the typo here. But there's a space for two research questions. You only have to write one. But if you have two, it will help you with your research. If you don't have a prompt you're currently working on, you can also write a research question based on Netflix. So go ahead, pause here, and continue once you're done. All right, so I hope you had enough time to create your research question. You're going to need it for the rest of the activities in this workshop, so please be sure you have it down before you continue. So before we answer these video recap questions, you first need to watch the video. Let me go ahead and get that set up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and full screen this and
Hi, I'm Ken, a librarian here at PCC. Let's talk about how to use EBSCOhost. You have a topic that you want to search. How can you use EBSCOhost to find magazine, newspaper, and scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles on your topic? After watching this video, you will be able to access EBSCOhost from the library website, search using words that describe your topic, identify the types of articles in your search results, and use EBSCOhost tools to save, print, and cite articles. EBSCOhost is the name of a company that makes databases containing articles from magazines, newspapers, and scholarly peer-reviewed academic journals. EBSCOhost databases can be general or cover specific topics such as education or science. Today, we'll use EBSCOhost Combined, which searches many of their databases all at once for articles on any topic. Let's see how you get to EBSCOhost. You need to access it from the library's website so you can sign in with your PCC LancerPoint login. Start at the library's homepage and click on Databases. Here is an alphabetical list of all the databases that the PCC library subscribes to for you. Go to the letter E for EBSCOhost, and there you'll find EBSCOhost Combined. When you click it, if you're off campus, you'll be prompted to log in. Enter your LancerPoint login ID and password. If your login isn't working, contact the library and we'll help you out. Here's the EBSCOhost Advanced Search screen, which is right where we want to be. Let's make sense of this together. Think about your topic. Let's say, for example, that you want to research climate change. That's the central idea for your topic. So, put it in the first box. But what happens when we search that? We'll get way too much information. Articles about every aspect of climate change all over the world, currently and in the past. Maybe you've already thought about narrowing your topic. What about climate change do you want to research? Here, we're telling EBSCOhost that we want to find articles that mention climate change and that mention crops. That should narrow the results down and make them much more manageable. Here are the search results. EBSCOhost sorts them by putting the best matches on top. This icon next to each article tells you what kind of publication it came from. The most common types are academic journal, which are scholarly, peer-reviewed articles, periodicals, which are magazines, and news, which are mainly newspaper articles. For each result, you get the title of the article, and in the small print, information about where that article came from. The author's name in yellow, the title of the publication, magazine, journal, etc. in green, and the date it was published in purple. Below that, you will see the link to actually read the article. When you see a link that says full text, that means click here to open up the article and read it. Once you're looking at an article, if you want to save it or share it, don't use the address at the top of your browser window. Don't bookmark the page. Instead, use the database tools on the right to email, print, or save the article to your Google Drive. There's also a handy cite tool that will generate a citation that you can use at the end of your paper. Here's some good news. Most of the article databases that PCC subscribes to have an advanced search window similar to the one in EBSCOhost, so you can adapt this technique when you're searching elsewhere. Need help? You can get 24/7 chat assistance or make an appointment for a phone or video conference consultation. Go to Ask a Librarian from the PCC Library homepage. We're always happy to help.
All right, so let's get back. So after you've viewed the video, you want to answer the video recap questions that you can find on your worksheet. Um, the worksheet has these 4 questions. Which database is the video using? What are some ways to narrow down searches? What are the most common types of sources? And after selecting the title of an article, how do you save it or share it? So please answer those 4. You can find all the answers in the video that we just watched. Now, as you saw, EBSCOhost is one way for you to actually find sources. When using the PCC Stratford Library website, you can use your article into your article. You can find your articles in 2 different ways. The first one is the one search bar, and the second one is through a database like EBSCOhost. I can show you very quickly what that looks like. So if you go to pasadena.edu/library, it should take you to this page. Now, like I said, you can put your search here. This is the one search bar, and it'll search for books, articles, and videos across the database, across databases, and also within PCC's library. So if there's physical copies that exist for what you're looking for, they'll show up there as well. Now, if you don't want to use this, you can also use a different databases, and you just scroll down here and click on databases. This is where you would find all the different databases. The one that was used in the video is EBSCOhost combined, which you can find here. Your instructor might have other recommendations as to which databases to use depending on the class you're taking. I know JSTOR, which you can find here, is a popular one for the humanities, so you can also try using that one. But again, your instructor will probably have some suggestions as to which databases they want you to use. So now you're going to use the research questions you created before and then go to the PCC Library webpage. I want you to find one article you can use as a source for your paper, and then go ahead and write that title of the source on your worksheet. So go ahead and do that, and once you're ready, continue with the video. Now, after you've found a source, so you've created your research question, you've used that question to search the databases for your article, now you finally have it. Now you need to evaluate it to make sure it's usable for your research. Not all sources are created equal. When finding your sources, it's really important that you determine whether the source is credible and relevant to your topic. So when evaluating your sources, you want to consider the following. The first thing is authority. Is the author an expert in the field? Or what are the author's credentials? You can quickly search them up on Google to see what this person has written. That will give you an idea of whether or not they are an expert or just a blogger or whatever it may be. But you want to make sure you're getting information from an expert in the field. When you're getting information from a web page, check to see if an author is listed. It's usually more authoritative if the author's name is listed on that page. The second criteria you want to consider when evaluating a source is timeliness. When was the information published or posted? Is the date of publication important for your research? Now, I know general rule of thumb for some is an article written within the last 10 years. Now, that's not always the case, because if you're researching a topic that has a legacy of research on it, maybe you want to uh, reference earlier research. Perhaps it's a topic that isn't as popular as others, so there's not as much research. In that case, maybe the date isn't as important. However, if it's, say, a scientific topic like climate change, you probably want to have more recent research, as that's a topic that's constantly changing and constantly being researched. So it's all dependent. Your instructor might have their own preferences when it comes to the timeliness of an article. If it's a web page, are the links functional? Has it been revised or updated? You can usually find that information at the bottom of the website to know if it's revised or updated. But if links are broken, chances are it hasn't been updated, which means the information might be out of date. The next criteria you want to consider when evaluating sources is its relevance. Does the information answer a part of your research question? Now, this is really important because if it's not answering a part of your research question, it's probably not relevant to what you're writing. Who is the intended audience? Is it a commercial site for the general public, like a .com or WebMD, or would an article written by a physician for other physicians be a better fit? So this is a very specific example. If you're writing a paper on a medical issue or something of the sort, but it is important to identify the intended audience. If your instructor is requesting peer-reviewed resources or articles from scholarly journals, a commercial site probably wouldn't be relevant to what you're writing. It's all dependent on what you're writing about and what your instructor preferences are. There's also accuracy. So, is information supported by evidence? Again, just like you have to, authors are also expected to cite their sources. If it's an article written entirely without evidence when it should have evidence, you probably wouldn't consider that article accurate or credible. Has it been verified or put through the peer reviewed process? The peer reviewed process is when other experts in the field read something by an expert in the field and approve of it. It's really important that articles are peer reviewed. If you are doing an essay on a and when you're writing an essay for a course, preferably your articles are peer reviewed and you refrain from getting information from websites um, like different news sources such as the LA Times, New York Times, CNN, um, MSNBC, Fox News, whatever you use or get your news from, you're probably going to want to focus on getting information from peer reviewed articles instead. So that's why that's a question asked here. And then bias. So, who is the author sponsor of the information? Does the author or website have an agenda? For example, the Salt Institute would not publish information that made salt appear unhealthy. So, this is a really important question when evaluating bias because sometimes we have to evaluate our own biases in order to understand a bias that we might also have. So, if you're getting, again, your information from your preferred news site, a lot of those news sites do have bias. And it's important to consider that when writing about articles because if you are picking a clearly biased source, your argument will become less credible, especially for those who don't agree with that source. Is information basically objective and fact based, or is it an opinion or propaganda? Again, articles that use evidence, like peer reviewed articles, are most likely to be objective and fact based, versus articles you might find on a .com might be a bit more opinionated and less focused on getting facts across. So always consider that when choosing resources or sources for your paper. So this next activity is for you to evaluate the source that you picked. So using the information that was just provided, the 5 criteria for evaluating a source, refer back to the source you found in activity 2 and determine if this source is credible and relevant to your essay. On your DLA worksheet, explain why it is helpful or why it's not helpful. So go ahead and pause here, complete that question, and then resume once you're done. All right, so that was it for this workshop. Again, you should have been able to come up with a research question, find at least one article, and then evaluate that article to see if it's relevant to your essay or not. If you need more help, you can go to the Writing Support Center to visit a tutor. You would just need to go to this link, which I will also put in the transcript, and you can click Meet with the Tutor, and the tutor can help you with any stage of the writing process. That Meet with a Tutor button will take you to a live Zoom room, so keep that in mind when clicking on it. And please pay attention to the hours of operation, which are Monday through Thursday, 9 to 7, and Fridays, 9 to 2. We are closed on weekends and on holidays as well. But if you want to discuss your research further, I highly recommend you see a tutor. You can also go to the PCC Shatford Library. There's actually a lot of videos on research, more videos on how to evaluate sources, videos on MLA format, and I highly recommend that you use those resources if you're still having a little bit of trouble understanding how to research. Again, I'll drop this link in the chat or in the transcript, but you can also type this into your browser if you'd like to see more of those videos. Anyways, I hope you found this workshop useful and that you will come back and watch another one of our workshops in the future. Good luck on your research papers, and we hope to see you soon.